The day I chose Alice was the day my mother stopped calling me her daughter. I didn't expect it to happen quite like that, in the middle of our family's marble-floored foyer, with the crystal chandelier casting judgmental shadows across her face. My name is Sierra, and until that moment, I'd been the perfect Blair daughter. Ivy League educated, successful in the family business, and, according to my mother, just one good marriage away from completing the picture-perfect life she'd planned for me. "You can't be serious," my mother said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Adoption? Have you lost your mind?" I stood my ground, though my hands were trembling. "I've met her, Mom. Alice is incredible. She's brilliant, kind, and—" "She's not blood," my father interrupted, emerging from his study. His presence filled the room like a storm cloud. "The Blair name means something, Sierra. We don't just take in strays." The word strays hit me like a physical blow. I'd seen Alice's file 3 months ago, a 12-year-old girl who'd lost her parents in a car accident. The moment I met her, something clicked. She had this way of looking at the world that made everything seem possible. "Dad, if you'd just meet her." "This discussion is over," he said, turning back toward his study. "Either come to your senses or—" "Or what?" I challenged, my voice stronger than I felt. "You'll cut me off? Disinherit me? Go ahead." My mother gasped. My sister Natalie, who'd been hovering in the doorway, stepped forward. "Sierra, please, think about what you're doing." "I have thought about it. For months. Alice needs a family and I—" "We are your family!" My mother's voice cracked. "Everything we've built, everything we've worked for. You'd throw it all away for some what, Mom? Some orphan?" I pulled out my phone and showed them Alice's picture. "Look at her. Really look at her." But they wouldn't. My mother turned away and my father's study door slammed shut. Natalie reached for my arm. "Give them time. Maybe if you wait—" "I can't wait. The adoption hearing is next week." I took a deep breath. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you I'm becoming a mother." "Then you're no daughter of mine." My mother's words fell like ice. "Get out." I'd prepared myself for resistance, but this felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. "Mom, out!" I walked to the door, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Each step echoed with finality. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. "You know what's funny? Alice asked me yesterday what her new grandparents would be like. She was so excited to meet you." My mother's face twitched, but she held her ground. Natalie looked between us, tears in her eyes. "Nat," I said softly, "you're welcome to meet your niece any time." The drive home was a blur. I pulled into my driveway and sat there, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone buzzed, a text from the adoption agency confirming tomorrow's pre-placement visit. I opened my gallery and found the video from last week. Alice sat cross-legged on the floor of the group home, explaining her science project to me. Her eyes lit up as she described how she'd built a small wind turbine from recycled materials. "And see, Sierra," she'd said, pointing to the tiny blades spinning in front of a fan. "It actually works. Do you think when I come home we could build a bigger one?" "When I come home. Not if. When." I wiped my eyes and typed a quick response to the agency. "Looking forward to tomorrow's visit. Everything's ready." Because it was. The guest room had been transformed into a space for a 12-year-old girl who loved science and art. The walls were painted her favourite shade of blue, and a desk by the window waited for her projects. On the bookshelf, engineering books sat next to Harry Potter. My phone buzzed again. "Natalie, they'll come around. They have to. But Sierra, are you sure about this?" I thought about Alice's smile, about the way she'd hugged me goodbye last week, about how she'd whispered, "See you soon, Mom," when she thought I couldn't hear. "More sure than I've ever been about anything," I texted back. Tomorrow I'd sign the papers that would make me Alice's mother. My parents might have written me out of their story, but Alice and I? We were about to write our own. And somehow, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, I knew that would be enough. More than enough. It would be everything. Mom, I think I solved it. Alice burst into my home office, waving a notebook filled with calculations. 3 years had passed since the adoption, and my 15-year-old daughter had grown into a force of nature. I pushed away from my laptop, grateful for the interruption from quarterly reports. Solved what, sweetie? The solar panel efficiency problem I've been working on. Look! She spread her notes across my desk, pointing excitedly at diagrams. If we adjust the angle and add this coating I developed... The doorbell interrupted her explanation. Through the window, I spotted Natalie's car in the driveway. Alice's face fell slightly. Is that Aunt Natalie again? Why don't you head upstairs and finish your homework? I'll handle this. She gathered her notes, hesitating at the door. Tell her I said hi. I guess. These surprise visits from Natalie had become more frequent lately. I opened the front door to find my sister clutching her designer purse like a shield. Mom's sick, she blurted out before I could speak. My heart skipped. How sick? Nothing serious, just the flu. But she's been asking about Alice. Natalie stepped inside, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She saw the article about Alice winning the state science fair. They have Google Alerts set up for us now. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Sierra, please. They're trying in their way. Natalie sank onto the couch. Dad's business is struggling, the market's changing, and he's... Well, you know how he is about change. I did know. The man who refused to modernize his email system was probably having a hell of a time adapting to current market demands. What do they want, Nat? Because if they're expecting me to come crawling back... No, nothing like that. Just... maybe bring Alice to Sunday dinner? Let them meet her properly? I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. After 3 years of pretending she doesn't exist, after missing every birthday, every achievement, people can change, Natalie insisted. Quinton's been talking to Dad, trying to... Mom, is everything okay? Alice stood at the top of the stairs, concern etched on her face. Natalie turned, and I saw her eyes widen. The gangly 12-year-old in the adoption photos had grown into a poised teenager with bright eyes and her father's old lab coat that I'd gotten her for Christmas. Alice, Wow, you've grown so much. That tends to happen in 3 years, Alice replied coolly, descending the stairs. I heard you mention Sunday dinner. Don't worry about us, we have plans. We do, I asked. Yeah, remember, Lane's coming over to help me with the prototype. And you promised to make your famous lasagna. I hadn't promised any such thing, but I played along. Right, of course. Natalie's face fell. Another time, maybe. Alice reached the bottom of the stairs and stood beside me. You know what's funny? I used to dream about having grandparents who'd be proud of me. Now, I'm kind of glad they stayed away. Because Mom, she squeezed my hand. She's been enough. More than enough. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. Alice, they made mistakes, but... Mistakes? Alice's voice sharpened. Is that what we're calling it? They threw their daughter out for choosing to love someone who needed love. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. Alice, I whispered, squeezing her hand back. No, Mom, they need to hear this. She turned back to Natalie. Tell them I'm not interested in their guilt or their late attempts at connection. Tell them I'm too busy revolutionizing solar energy efficiency and making my mom proud. Natalie stood, clutching her purse tighter. I'll tell them you're both doing well. After she left, I pulled Alice into a hug. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. She pulled back, her eyes fierce. Nobody gets to hurt you anymore, not even them. Especially not them. When did you get so protective? Learned from the best. She grinned suddenly. But you do actually have to make lasagna now. Lane really is coming over to help with the prototype. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Deal. But first, show me these calculations you were excited about. As Alice launched into her explanation, my phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Dad's company lost another major contract. He's desperate but won't admit it. Please think about Sunday dinner. I turned my phone face down and focused on my daughter's animated description of solar panel coefficients. Let them worry about their precious family business. Alice and I had built something far more valuable. A family based on choice, not obligation. But as I watched her sketch diagrams in the air, a small part of me wondered if karma wasn't already setting its wheels in motion. After all, the brilliant young scientist they'd rejected might just hold the key to saving everything they held dear. "They're filing for bankruptcy protection," Quinton said over coffee. My brother-in-law had suggested meeting at a quiet cafe across town, away from prying eyes. "Your father's too proud to admit it publicly, but the company's bleeding money." I stirred my latte, watching the foam swirl. "How bad?" "Bad enough that they're selling the summer house, the one in Martha's Vineyard." That hit hard. I'd spent every summer there until the estrangement. Dad would rather sell his kidney than that house. "Times change," Quinton leaned forward. "Look, I know you don't owe them anything, but you understand modern business better than anyone in the family. If you could just—" "Mom," Alice's voice cut through the cafe's quiet buzz. She stood at our table, still in her lab coat from her university internship, Lane hovering uncertainly behind her. "Uncle Quinton." "Alice," Quinton stood, smiling warmly. "I haven't seen you since—" "Since never," she finished coldly. "Because you never visited either." Lane stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Alice's shoulder. "We can come back later." "No, stay." I gestured to the empty chairs. Quinton was just leaving. "Actually," Alice said, sliding into a seat, "maybe he should hear this." She pulled out her tablet. "Lane and I just came from the lab. We've perfected the solar coating." My heart skipped. She'd been working on this project for months, refusing to show anyone but Lane and me until it was ready. "The what?" Quinton asked. "A nanotech coating that increases solar panel efficiency by 40%, Lane explained, his eyes bright with excitement. "It's revolutionary." Alice pulled up graphs and charts. "We've run all the tests. It works. And the manufacturing cost is minimal compared to the energy output increase." I watched Quinton's face as understanding dawned. This could save millions in energy costs for large-scale operations. Like, say, a manufacturing company struggling to keep up with rising energy costs. Alice's smile was sharp. "One that still uses outdated power systems in all its facilities." Quinton stared at her. "You know about the company's problems." "I know everything." Alice swiped through more documents. "I've been monitoring the situation. Did you really think Mum wouldn't keep tabs on her father's life's work?" I reached for her hand under the table, squeezing gently. "Alice, we're presenting this at the Clean Energy Summit next month," she continued. "Every major company in the industry will be there, including your biggest competitors." Quinton's coffee sat forgotten. "Alice, if you're suggesting what I think—" "I'm not suggesting anything." She stood, gathering her things. "I'm just letting you know that solutions exist. Whether pride allows certain people to see them, well, that's not my problem." Lane helped her with her coat, trying to hide a smile. "We should head back to the lab, Alice. The final testing sequence." "Right," she kissed my cheek. "Don't work too late, Mom. Movie night, remember?" After they left, Quinton let out a long breath. "She's brilliant." "Yes, she is." "And she did this for you, to prove them wrong." I shook my head. "No, she did this because she's passionate about sustainable energy. The fact that it might help the family business, that's just karma. They should know about this. Then tell them." I stood, gathering my purse. "Tell them their granddaughter, the one they rejected, might hold the key to saving everything. Tell them she did it without their name, their money, or their approval." "Sierra, movie night with my daughter, remember?" I headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Quinton, the summer house? Tell them not to sell it yet. Something tells me they might need liquid assets for technology upgrades soon." That evening, curled up on the couch with Alice watching her favorite sci-fi movie, I finally asked the question that had been burning in my mind. "How long have you been working on this specifically for the company?" She paused the movie, turning to face me. "Since Aunt Natalie's visit 3 months ago, Lane helped me research their energy consumption patterns. Did you know they spend 4 times the industry average on power?" Your grandfather isn't big on efficiency. Well, he's going to have to be. Her expression softened. I didn't do it for them, Mom. I did it because it's good technology that could help a lot of companies. But if they want it, they'll have to come to you. Exactly. She grinned suddenly. Want to be my +1 at the summit presentation? Wouldn't miss it for the world. I pulled her close, remembering the 12-year-old who built tiny wind turbines. You know I'm proud of you, right? Not because of this, but because of who you are. I know, Mom. She unpaused the movie. Now shush. This is the best part. But as the sci-fi drama unfolded on screen, I couldn't help thinking about another drama about to unfold. One where pride would face off against necessity, and where karma might finally come full circle. The family estate looked exactly the same, right down to the pretentious lion door knockers. I hadn't planned to return here, but Natalie's frantic call had left little choice. Family emergency meeting, she'd said. Dad's making some kind of announcement. Alice squeezed my hand as we stood at the door. Ready? Are you? Born ready. She smoothed her blazer, professional, polished, nothing like the rejected orphan they probably imagined. Besides, Lane's on standby if we need a quick escape. The door opened before we could knock. Natalie stood there, eyes wide. You came. Both of you. Let's not make it a bigger deal than it is, I said, stepping inside. The foyer still smelled of Mom's favourite potpourri. Family portraits lined the walls, a timeline of our lives, stopping abruptly 3 years ago. Alice studied them with clinical interest. Interesting gap in the family history, she murmured. Voices drifted from the living room. I recognized Dad's agitated tone, Mom's attempts to soothe him, and other voices. Board members, probably. Sierra. Mom stood in the doorway, looking older than I remembered. Her eyes fixed on Alice. And Alice. Mrs. Blair, Alice replied coolly. Lovely home. The chandelier's gorgeous. Austrian crystal, right? Though the energy consumption must be astronomical. Mom flinched. Please come in. Your father's about to start. The living room fell silent as we entered. Dad stood by the fireplace, his usual power position, but something was off. His shoulders sagged, his hair greyer than ever. Sierra. He nodded stiffly. I wasn't sure you'd come. Natalie said it was important. It is. He cleared his throat, addressing the room. As you know, we've faced some challenges lately. Market changes, rising costs. Just say it, Kingsley, one board member interrupted. We're sinking. We're not sinking, Dad snapped. We're adapting, which is why I've called this meeting. I'm announcing my retirement. Gasps filled the room. Mum grabbed the nearest chair for support. The board will begin searching for a new CEO immediately, Dad continued. Someone who understands modern markets, someone who can... Actually, Alice's voice cut through the shock like a laser. I have a better idea. All eyes turned to her. She stood, pulling out her tablet with the same confidence she showed in the lab. Alice, I warned softly. Trust me, Mom. She connected her tablet to the room's projector. Mr. Blair, grandfather if you prefer, though you haven't earned that title, your company's main problem isn't leadership. It's inefficiency. Graphs appeared on the screen. Energy consumption rates, cost analyses, projection models. Your facilities use outdated systems that bleed money, but there's a solution. She pulled up her research. A proprietary nanotech coating that could cut your energy costs by 40%. The board members leaned forward. Dad's face reddened. Who do you think you are? He began. I'm the person who developed this technology, Alice cut in. The same person you rejected because I wasn't blood. Ironic, isn't it? This is preposterous, Dad sputtered. You're just a brilliant scientist, a board member finished. I read about your work in Tech Monthly. That coating, it's revolutionary, Alice smiled. Thank you. We're presenting at the Clean Energy Summit next month. Every major company will be there, including your competitors. The room erupted in urgent whispers. Dad gripped the mantle, knuckles white. What do you want? He asked finally. Want? Alice looked genuinely surprised. I don't want anything. I'm simply presenting options. You can either swallow your pride and work with me, or watch your life's work crumble because you couldn't see past your own prejudices. Mom stepped forward. Alice, please, we made mistakes. Mistakes? I stood beside my daughter. You threw us away, and now you want her help? The company's not just about us, Natalie interjected. Hundreds of employees depend on it. Alice's expression softened slightly. I know. That's why I'm here. But understand this. If we do this, we do it my way. No compromises, no conditions. Dad opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded once. Good. Alice gathered her things. Have your lawyers contact Mum's office to set up a meeting. We'll discuss terms then. As we turned to leave, she paused at the door. Oh, and grandmother, that chandelier. Switch to LED bulbs. Small changes make big differences. In the car, I finally found my voice. That was satisfying? She grinned. Just wait until they read my terms. Lane helped me draft them. They're going to love the environmental compliance clauses. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Mum, they hurt you. Hurt us. But instead of revenge, I'm offering salvation. She pulled out her phone to text Lane. Sometimes, the best revenge is forcing people to face their own failures, and then helping them fix them. I started the car, glancing one last time at the house. Through the window, I could see them all still standing there, shocked into silence by the hurricane that was my daughter. Ready to go home? I asked. Actually, she smiled. I think we just started something much bigger than going home. The conference room felt like a pressure cooker. On one side sat my father, mother, and 3 board members. On our side, Alice, Lane, our lawyer, and me. The contract lay between us like a loaded weapon. This is absurd, Dad exploded, throwing down his reading glasses. 51% control of environmental initiatives, mandatory board positions for both of you, complete restructuring of our energy systems within 18 months. Those are my terms, Alice replied calmly. The technology alone will save you millions annually. The restructuring will position you as an industry leader in sustainable manufacturing. We've operated the same way for 40 years, and that's exactly why you're failing. Alice pulled up projections on the wall screen. Your energy costs are crippling you. Your competitors are going green while you're burning money on outdated systems. Lane stepped in, his voice steady. We've run the numbers extensively. Even with implementation costs, you'll see return on investment within 2 years. Return on investment? Mom's voice quavered. This isn't just about money. This is our family legacy. Family? I couldn't help but laugh. Now you care about family? Sierra, our lawyer warned softly. No, let's talk about family, Alice said, standing. 3 years ago, you threw away your daughter because she chose to love someone who needed love. Now you're facing bankruptcy and suddenly family matters. The room fell silent. Even Dad couldn't meet her eyes. Here's what's going to happen, Alice continued. You'll sign this contract. I'll save your company. But understand this. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for the hundreds of employees who depend on their paychecks, for the environment. And yes, for my mother, who still checks your company's stock prices every morning because despite everything, she cares about her father's life's work. I felt tears prick my eyes. Dad looked at me sharply. You still follow the company? Every day, I admitted. Just because you stopped being my father doesn't mean I stopped being your daughter. Mum made a small, broken sound. The coating technology is just the beginning, Alice pressed on. I have plans for complete modernization, solar integration, waste reduction systems, but it happens on my terms. Or what? One board member asked. Or I take it to your competitors. They're already interested. She smiled. Very interested. Dad stood abruptly, pacing to the window. You're blackmailing us. No, I'm offering you salvation. The choice to take it is yours. Lane pulled out another document. We've also drafted a press release announcing the partnership. The market would respond very favourably to a family reconciliation story combined with green innovation. You've thought of everything, Dad said quietly. I learned from you, actually. Alice's voice softened slightly. You always said business is about leverage. Well, here we are. The board members huddled together, whispering urgently. Mom kept looking between Dad and me, her perfectly manicured hands twisting in her lap. Finally, Dad turned from the window. If, and I mean if, we agree to this, what guarantees do we have that you won't just take control and destroy everything? Because unlike you, Alice replied, I understand that family isn't about blood, it's about choice, and I'm choosing to help, despite everything. The question is, are you choosing to let me? The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Then Dad did something I'd never seen before. He sat down heavily, looking suddenly old. Where do I sign? Dad! Natalie burst out from the doorway where she'd been listening. You can't be serious. We don't have a choice, he said quietly. And maybe it's time we admitted that. Alice pushed the contract forward. As Dad reached for a pen, she added, one more thing. Mom gets her old office back, the corner one with the view. I stared at her. I hadn't asked for that. And Sunday dinners, she continued. Not every week, but sometimes, if Mom wants, because this only works if we actually try to be a family. Mom started crying openly now. Dad's hand shook as he signed. Welcome to the future of Blair Industries, Alice said, but her voice was gentle now. Let's build something better, together. As we gathered our things to leave, Mom caught my arm. Sierra, would you like to have lunch sometime? Just us? I looked at Alice, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Okay, I said. But not at the club. There's this little cafe near my office. Anywhere, Mom whispered. Anywhere you want. Outside, Lane hugged Alice tightly. You were amazing in there. Thanks for having my back. She turned to me. Mom, you okay? I pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with lab chemicals. You didn't have to add that part about Sunday dinners. Yes, I did. She pulled back, eyes bright. Because sometimes fixing things means more than just business plans and contracts. Sometimes it means giving people a chance to be better than they were. Looking back at the building, I wondered if she was right. If maybe, just maybe, karma wasn't about punishment after all. Maybe it was about giving people the opportunity to face their mistakes and choose a different path. They're sabotaging us, Lane burst into my office, waving his tablet. The old guard in production is deliberately slowing down implementation. I looked up from my computer where I'd been reviewing the first phase of Alice's modernization plan. What do you mean? They're losing equipment orders, scheduling installation crews for the wrong dates, claiming system incompatibilities that don't exist. He pulled up a spreadsheet. We're 3 weeks behind schedule. Dad's people, I muttered. Of course they're resistant. My office door opened again, and Alice stormed in, her lab coat fluttering. Did you see the memo? They're trying to modify my coating formula without consulting me. What? I grabbed my phone to call Dad, but it already showed 3 missed calls from Natalie. Sierra, she said when I called back. It's bad. Dad's old VP of operations is rallying people against the changes. They're saying Alice is too young, too inexperienced. Too much of an outsider, I finished bitterly. You need to come to the main facility. Now. The factory floor was chaos when we arrived. Workers clustered in groups, arguing loudly. The installation team sat idle beside crates of new solar panels, while Dad's VP, Richard, held court near the control room. These changes will cost jobs, he was saying. This girl thinks she can waltz in and... This girl is saving your jobs, Lane shouted, pushing forward. Alice grabbed my arm. Mom, look at the control panel. I followed her gaze. The main power systems were running at dangerous levels, well above normal parameters. They're overloading the old system to prove it's more reliable, she whispered. But they've miscalculated. If those readings are accurate... A loud pop echoed through the facility, followed by cascading sparks from the main electrical panel. Emergency lights flashed as the backup system engaged. Everyone out, I shouted. Emergency shutdown. Workers scattered as smoke began pouring from the control room. Alice sprinted toward it, Lane close behind. Alice, no! I tried to grab her, but she was already punching numbers into the backup terminal. The main system's going to blow if we don't redirect power now. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. Lane, cut power to sectors 3 through 7. On it! I grabbed a fire extinguisher as more sparks flew. Through the chaos, I saw Dad and Mom rushing in, faces pale. What happened? Dad demanded. Your people happened, I shot back. They overloaded the system trying to prove Alice wrong. Another explosion rocked the facility. Alice's voice cut through the noise. Got it! Lane, now! The emergency lights flickered, then stabilized. The smoking control panel went dark as backup systems fully engaged. In the sudden quiet, Alice's voice carried clearly. That's what happens when you let pride override science. She turned to face the gathered workers. The old system just failed catastrophically. If we hadn't installed the backup system last week, against significant resistance, I might add, this whole facility would be dark right now. Richard stepped forward. Now see here. No, you see. Alice cut him off. I just saved this facility from a complete meltdown. Your little demonstration of reliability nearly caused millions in damage. Still want to question my competence? Dad pushed through the crowd. Richard, in my office. Now, he turned to Alice. How long until we can restore power? The new system can be online in an hour. The old one? She gestured at the smoking panel. That's dead. Permanently. Guess you'll have to use my inexperienced solution after all. Workers began drifting back to their stations, many nodding respectfully to Alice. Lane started directing the installation team to begin work on the remaining sectors. Mum touched my arm. She really does know what she's doing, doesn't she? She always has. I watched Alice confidently giving instructions to the maintenance crew. Maybe now they'll actually listen to her. Sierra, Dad called from across the floor, I need your help with the incident report. And Alice's, of course. It wasn't quite an apology, but his face showed something I'd rarely seen before. Respect. Alice joined us, still slightly smoky from the control room. Well, congratulations. You just got your modernization ahead of schedule. Sometimes the universe has a way of forcing change. The universe or a certain teenage genius. I smiled. Speaking of which, she checked her phone. The press will be here in 20 minutes. Something about a heroic young innovator saves family company. Lane's already handling it. Dad's eyes widened. The press? Welcome to modern business management, Alice said sweetly. Now, should we discuss expediting the remaining upgrades? Unless you'd prefer more electrical fires. As we walked toward Dad's office, I caught Alice's small smile. She'd known all along that something like this might happen, and she'd been prepared, turning their resistance into a public relations triumph. My daughter hadn't just inherited my determination, she'd improved upon it. And watching Dad's face as she outlined her accelerated implementation plan, I knew the last pieces of resistance were finally crumbling. Stock's up 70% since the modernization, Lane announced, bursting into the conference room where we were preparing for the company's centennial celebration. The press is calling us the Green Manufacturing Revolution. Alice barely looked up from her tablet. Did they mention the employee wellness programs too? Front page of the Business Journal, he confirmed, dropping a newspaper on the table. Along with a very flattering photo of you and Sierra at the factory reopening. 6 months had transformed the company. The old manufacturing floor now gleamed with solar panels and state-of-the-art equipment. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and our carbon footprint had dropped dramatically. Your father wants to see you both, Mom said, entering with an armful of decorations. In his office, he says it's important. Alice and I exchanged glances. Despite the success, these meetings still carried the weight of years of tension. Dad stood at his office window holding something in his hands. Close the door, please. If this is about the new environmental compliance standards, Alice started, the data clearly shows... It's not about that. He turned, and I was surprised to see his eyes were wet. This is about family. He placed a wooden box on his desk. I recognized it immediately, the family heirloom box passed down through generations of Blairs. Dad, I was wrong, he said simply. About everything. About what makes a family strong. About what makes a business successful. About you, Sierra. And especially about you, Alice. Alice stepped forward cautiously. Mr. Blair, grandfather, he corrected softly. Please, if you'll allow it. He opened the box, revealing the antique compass that had guided our family's first business venture a century ago. This was supposed to go to my firstborn son, he continued, then to my firstborn daughter. But I let pride and tradition blind me to what was right in front of me, the most brilliant mind this family has ever produced. He lifted the compass and held it out to Alice. This belongs to you now. You've shown us all true north when we were lost. Alice's hands trembled as she took it. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay, Mom blurted out. Both of you. Not just for business, but for Sunday dinners and holidays and everything we missed. There's more, Dad added, pulling out papers. I'm restructuring the company leadership. Sierra, you'll be CEO. Alice, Chief Innovation Officer with a seat on the board. If you want it. I felt tears threatening. Dad, let me finish. He took a deep breath. And I want to announce it at tonight's celebration, in front of everyone. Let them all see that this company's future isn't about blood, it's about vision. Your vision, Alice. Alice studied the compass, then looked up with that determined expression I knew so well. On one condition. Name it. The summer house? The one you almost sold? Turn it into a science camp for foster kids. Give other children the chances I got. Mom gasped softly. Dad's face worked with emotion. Already done, he said. The paperwork was filed last week. We're calling it the Alice Wilson Science Academy for Young Innovators. Alice launched herself into his arms, surprising everyone, especially Dad. After a moment's shock, he hugged her back fiercely. I'm so sorry, he whispered. So very sorry. Group hug, Lane called from the doorway, where he'd been not so subtly eavesdropping. Mom laughed through her tears and joined us. Later, as workers set up for the celebration, Alice and I stood on the factory floor, watching the sunset stream through the solar panels she'd designed. You planned this all along, didn't you? I asked. From the moment you saw the company was in trouble? She smiled, turning the compass over in her hands. Not all of it. The science camp was a surprise, but the rest? Let's just say I learned from the best about playing the long game. From me. From all of you. Grandfather's strategic thinking, grandmother's attention to detail, your determination. She paused. But mostly from you, Mom. You taught me that sometimes the greatest revenge is showing people a better way, and then helping them take it. The celebration hall was filling up. Through the windows we could see Dad practicing his speech, Mom fussing with his tie. Ready to be officially announced as the future of the family business? I asked. Alice tucked the compass into her pocket and straightened her blazer. Actually, I think we already are the present. The future is what we make next. And what's that? She grinned, that brilliant, unstoppable grin that had first captured my heart in a group home years ago. Well, Lane and I have been working on this new renewable energy concept as we walk toward our family, our whole, healing, imperfect family. I realized Alice was right. The best revenge wasn't about destroying the old, but about building something new and better from its foundations, and we were just getting started. And now, Dad announced to the packed auditorium at the Alice Wilson Science Academy, I'd like to introduce our first graduating class of young innovators. I watched from the side stage as 20 teenagers, all from foster homes, stood to thunderous applause. Each wore a lab coat with their name embroidered alongside the Academy logo, a compass pointing true north. Alice squeezed my hand. They did it, Mom. Every single one got full scholarships. Of course they did, Lane said, adjusting his camera. They had you as a mentor. The summer house had transformed beautifully into a state-of-the-art campus. Solar panels glinted on every roof, and the old tennis courts were now testing grounds for renewable energy projects. Dad continued his speech, his voice strong despite recent health challenges. When my granddaughter first proposed this academy, I didn't understand. Now watching these brilliant young minds flourish, I realized she saw something I couldn't, that potential knows no bloodlines. Mom dabbed at her eyes in the front row, sitting next to Natalie and Quinton. The family weekly dinners had become a tradition again, but different now, filled with lively debates about innovation and sustainability rather than rigid formality. And speaking of potential, Dad said, I'd like to share some news. Our company's Green Manufacturing Initiative, led by Alice, has just been awarded the Global Innovation Prize. But more importantly, he paused, looking directly at Alice. The patent royalties from her technologies will fund similar academies across the country. This was news to me. I turned to Alice, who was trying not to smile. Surprise, she whispered. Karma works better when it keeps giving. The ceremony concluded with each student presenting their final projects. I watched Alice move among them, offering encouragement and adjustments, every bit the mentor she never had. Ms. Wilson, one student, Maria, approached nervously. I wanted to thank you, not just for the scholarship, but for showing us that family isn't about where you come from. It's about where you choose to go, Alice finished, hugging her, and who you choose to become. Later, as the celebration wound down, we gathered in what used to be the summer house's formal dining room, now a cozy common area. Dad sat in his favourite armchair, the old family photos on the walls now mixed with pictures of academy students and their achievements. I've been thinking, he said, watching Alice help students pack up their projects, about what really makes a legacy. And, I prompted, I spent years worried about preserving the family name, but look at what she's built. Not just a successful business, but a way to lift others up. That's a true legacy. Mom joined us, carrying coffee. Remember when you said we don't take in strays? Dad winced. I was an old fool. Was? Alice teased, joining us. The board meeting last week suggests present tense? Hey now, he chuckled. I only argued against the flying solar drones because they seemed excessive. They're not flying solar drones, they're autonomous atmospheric monitoring platforms. Lane corrected, earning laughs from everyone. Natalie raised her coffee cup. To the next generation of innovators and the woman who showed us all a better way. No, Alice said firmly. To family. The one we're born with and the one we choose to build. As the evening light filtered through the solar windows Alice had designed, I watched my daughter surrounded by her students. My parents beaming with genuine pride, and Lane documenting everything for the Academy's newsletter. The wounds of rejection had healed into something stronger, something that could lift others out of similar pain. Mom, Alice called, Maria wants to show you her improved version of my solar coating. She's increased efficiency another 12%. Impossible, Dad said, but his eyes twinkled. Though I seem to recall saying that about your first design too. I joined them at the demonstration table where Maria's prototype glowed with possibility. Around us, other students gathered, eager to share their innovations, their dreams, their potential. This was Alice's real revenge, not destroying the old guard, but building a new generation that would make the old ways obsolete through sheer brilliance. She had taken rejection and turned it into a revolution of opportunity. Ready to head home? Lane asked as the last students left. Alice looked around the room, at the compass logo on the wall, at her grandfather dozing in his chair, at her grandmother arranging tomorrow's schedule, at me. I am home, she said simply. We all are. And in that moment, watching the sunset paint the academy in shades of gold, I realized that karma hadn't just come full circle. It had spiraled upward, lifting us all to something higher than we'd ever imagined. The lost little girl I'd chosen to love had become the woman who taught us all how to love better. And that was the greatest revenge of all.
Donna shared her living space with her husband Walter, who had become increasingly domineering despite not working. Walter, a stay-at-home spouse, managed household duties while Donna worked to support them financially. Their arrangement was intended to provide stability, but Walter's controlling nature undermined Donna's efforts, making her feel her contributions were futile. One day, Walter declared with a smug expression that he would allow his parents to live in their house, suggesting that Donna could move in with her in-laws without her consent. Donna was stunned and speechless at his audacity, especially considering she owned the house. This incident was a breaking point for her, having tolerated Walter's overbearing attitude for too long. Walter often issued commands as if he were entitled to do so, once demanding Donna fetch him ice cream late at night while he relaxed, despite her exhaustion from work. When Donna suggested he could get it himself, Walter laughed and insinuated that upsetting him could have consequences. His behavior wasn't just frustrating, it was exhausting. Donna felt increasingly disrespected and devalued, questioning the sustainability of living with someone who claimed superiority simply because he was the husband. She realized that if things didn't change, she couldn't continue in this way. Walter needed to understand the impact of his actions, and Donna decided it was time for him to face the consequences of his domineering behavior. At that moment, I realized that dealing with Walter on top of my already stressful job would push my stress levels to their limit. So, I told him, "I'm really tired, I'm sorry, I'm going to rest in my room." Walter didn't appreciate my response and blocked my way, challenging me. "Wait, what's with that attitude towards your husband? I could kick you out right now if I wanted to. Do you think it's all right to upset your spouse like that?" He looked furious. It baffled me how he could act so authoritative without contributing financially and how easily he could distress me, yet he couldn't handle the slightest inconvenience himself. It was like dealing with a child's tantrum. "I'm sorry, but I'm exhausted. Please just try to understand," I replied, forcing a smile, no longer wanting to engage further. Walter sighed deeply and muttered, "You're such a disappointment as a wife." I didn't have the energy to argue. I simply repeated, "I'm sorry," and retreated to my room. Day by day, Walter's overbearing behavior wore me down, but I was too exhausted to confront him. Then, one day, I caught a severe cold, which the doctor diagnosed as a stress-induced fever. Immediately, I thought of Walter's constant pressure. I was so ill that I couldn't move, so I took a day off from work and could only lie in bed. When I informed Walter of my condition, he snapped, "A cold? That's just an excuse. Go to work. You're useless." His harsh words seemed to make my fever spike even higher. He declared, "I won't be taking care of you. This is your mess. Deal with it." So I was left alone in my room, moaning from the fever with no one to help. I was too weak to prepare anything for myself, and I didn't want to face Walter again for fear of more verbal abuse. My temperature reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The fever was so intense that my body was drenched in sweat. I couldn't even get up to change my soaked clothes. I lay there pondering how much easier things might be if I could just pass away. With these grim thoughts, I endured a painful night alone. Perhaps it was the fever talking, but in my heart, I knew something had to change. Throughout the night, as the sun disappeared and the stars took over the sky, a deep sense of loneliness and doubt overwhelmed me. I longed for Walter's support, not even to cure my fever, but just to bring me an ice pack, apply a cool compress, and ask if I was okay. Sadly, this was just a fantasy. Instead, the words I received from him were harsh and uncaring, cutting deep and stirring up new anxieties. I questioned why I was the only one suffering, what I had done wrong, and why things couldn't be smoother between us. Once these thoughts began, I couldn't hold back the tears. The pain was just too much. After 5 days of rest, my fever subsided enough for me to return to work. My colleagues and bosses expressed their concern, asking if I was truly okay to be back. Although I was still recuperating, I felt compelled to support our household financially and couldn't afford more time off. Their genuine concern touched me deeply, such a stark contrast to Walter's indifference, and nearly brought me to tears again. At this point, a voice inside me screamed that I could no longer deal with Walter's behavior. I was pushing myself too hard, ignoring the signs that this way of life was unsustainable. Deep down, I knew that I couldn't keep going like this without eventually collapsing from the strain. By now, my feelings for Walter had significantly diminished, yet I lacked the energy to contemplate a separation. Amid these tumultuous feelings, I trudged through my days, working hard, returning home exhausted, and catering to Walter's unpredictable demands. This had become my daily routine. Then, one day while I was trying to find a moment of peace in my room, Walter called out, wanting to discuss something serious. It had been a long time since we had a real conversation. Typically, Walter would make significant decisions unilaterally. With a heavy heart, I sat down for the discussion, fearing what might come next. To my shock, Walter, with unexpected enthusiasm, announced, "I'll let my parents live in this house. You can't even cook, so leave." The first word that slipped out of my mouth was, "What?" He continued, "You need to leave because you're living with my in-laws." I was stunned, unable to accept the reality of his selfish demands. The situation had reached a breaking point, and I realized something had to change. As Walter steered the conversation forward, he revealed his plans to change the ownership of our house, transferring it to his name and his parents'. He bluntly stated his intentions to divorce me and start a new life, declaring his decision final and immune to my opinions. I felt utterly disregarded, my feelings trampled under decisions made without my consent. Walter, inflated with his man-of-the-house ego, seemed only concerned with his desires. My heart sank as I realized the impossibility of continuing life with him. Ignoring my growing detachment, Walter jeered, "You love me so much, don't you? I know this is shocking coming from a husband you love so dearly, but I'm sorry, I just want to take care of my family. Please understand." His words, meant to sound considerate, felt more like a scolding. I wanted to shout that he was wrong. Any affection I once felt for Walter had evaporated, leaving behind only disbelief at his selfishness and regret for not severing ties sooner. Why hadn't I left him earlier? If I had, perhaps he wouldn't have had the opportunity to exploit and demean me so thoroughly. I even resented my past self for being too lenient with him. Seeing my visible distress, Walter misread my pain as lingering love, thinking I couldn't bear the thought of a divorce. But he was mistaken. My feelings for him had long since faded into nothing more than disdain for a man who wrongly believed I still cared. Determined to set things straight, I said firmly, "Fine then, I'll leave." Walter gasped, "What?" He hadn't anticipated my readiness to accept the divorce and move on. He needed to understand that the old me, who always bailed him out, was gone for good. From now on, whatever happened to Walter, he would face it without me because our relationship was over. Seeing my resolve, Walter stood shocked and frozen. I seized the moment to head to my room and pack the essentials. I knew I couldn't take larger items today and would need to arrange for movers later. As I began to pack, Walter hurried over, perhaps finally realizing the gravity of the situation. Walter approached me, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Are you sure about this? If we divorce, we'll be strangers." I smiled softly and replied, "I've already fallen out of love with you. Letting go feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders." Hearing this, Walter stood there, looking bewildered and lost. I nodded, thanked him for the years together, and walked out of the house. His worried expression lingered in my mind as I returned to my parents' home. Upon explaining everything to my parents, they initially reacted with fury at Walter's behavior, but soon calmed down, reassured by my resolve and the plan I had in place. I began to recuperate at my parents' home, taking the first steps by initiating the divorce proceedings. After I sent the divorce papers, Walter messaged me, "Are you sure about this? I don't know if it's really a good thing, but I don't have any feelings for you anymore. If we've gone this far, there's no turning back." His message concluded with a request to expedite the divorce. "I feel so much better now that you're gone, so fill out the divorce papers quickly." I replied, but received no response. A few days later, I received the completed divorce papers from Walter with his sections already filled out. I promptly completed my part and submitted it to the county office. Now, Walter and I were officially divorced. During the divorce, we divided our assets. Walter received the house, as he had insisted, so I transferred ownership to him and chose to move on. The house had never really felt like home to me. It was more of a burden. Instead, I sought alimony from Walter, which his parents initially covered since he wasn't working. However, he was now job hunting, likely planning to repay them once he secured employment. But as is often the case, reality doesn't always align with plans. A month after the divorce was finalized, I had moved out of my parents' home into a new place, enjoying a more peaceful life. Then I received a call from Walter. Honestly, it was annoying. I could guess why he was calling, but ignoring him might lead to more complications. So, knowing I'd have to address it sooner or later for the sake of my future, I answered the phone with a firm, "Hello, what do you want?" Completely fed up, I wanted him to get straight to the point. Reluctantly, I listened as he pleaded, "Please help me." His desperate tone made me chuckle. Walter was clearly in a tough spot, and while part of me felt distant, another part was mildly amused by the irony of his desperation. Walter's call caught me off guard. I hadn't expected things to have deteriorated so quickly. "Well, what's going on? You need to tell me the whole story," I replied, half amused by the situation. I suspected why Walter might be struggling, but I wanted him to lay it all out himself. With a hesitant voice and stumbling over his words, Walter began to explain. He had taken over the house after our divorce and managed it fine for a month. However, he now faced a rent payment he couldn't meet due to his unemployment. Desperate, he had asked my former parents-in-law, who were on a pension, for help. But the rent was much steeper than anyone anticipated, about $2,500, a sum they couldn't afford on their fixed income. My former in-laws were livid, accusing him of misleading them. "This isn't what we agreed to," they insisted, placing the blame squarely on Walter. Feeling lost and unsure, Walter called me nearly in tears. "I didn't realize the rent would be so high. The place is a mess now. What are you going to do about it?" Frustrated and overwhelmed, Walter was now trying to pin the blame on me. Admittedly, I hadn't discussed the specifics of the rent before our separation, but it was Walter's folly to assume responsibility for the house without understanding the financial commitments involved. He had pushed me away, treating me like an outsider, and now he was facing the consequences of his decisions. Despite this, he seemed unable to accept responsibility and reached out to me for help. I couldn't help but sigh at his audacity. Ignoring the strain in his voice, Walter continued urgently, "Please, I need your help. We can't keep going like this. I need you." His desperation was palpable. The rent due date had likely already passed, which meant they might be behind on payments. The landlord of that house had a reputation for being temperamental and strict about rent deadlines. I remember being warned repeatedly when I was still living there. Never be late with the rent. If they missed a payment, they would face serious repercussions. Walter, having met the landlord a few times, knew exactly how intimidating they could be. His call was a last-ditch effort, driven by sheer desperation. When Walter called me pleading for help, he said, "Please, just cover the rent for 1 month. I don't have anyone else to turn to. You still care about me, right? If someone you care about is in trouble, you should help them out." His tone was still self-centered, as if he hadn't changed at all. I wanted to tell him straight that my feelings for him had long since faded. But instead, I held back and replied coldly, "I'm sorry, but I don't have any obligation to help you. You were the one who cut me off, and now you expect me to assist you when it's convenient for you. That's not fair." Walter tried to defend himself. "Please don't be so cold. I really can't handle this alone. Whether you still love me or not doesn't matter now. We were married once, right? Can't you help me out just this once?" "No, you were the one who left me. Even before that, my feelings for you had already cooled. It's been a long time since I stopped loving you, I responded firmly. Hearing Walter's dejected voice on the other end, he said, I can't believe it, which struck a chord deep within me. For so long, I had endured everything. Even when Walter was selfish, took me for granted, or mistreated me, especially when I was sick, I stayed by his side, hoping to salvage our marriage. I worked tirelessly for the life we had, but this was the outcome. Why hadn't I left sooner when my love for him faded? Why didn't I distance myself earlier? These regrets flooded in, mingling with the anger I felt towards him. Walter never truly faced me. He never showed real concern, never protected me, and never embraced the idea of navigating life together as a team. All this time, he treated me like a maid, a mere money-making machine. Each time he acted this way, he seemed oblivious to my suffering. Yet now, despite all this being a result of his actions, he came pleading for help as if he were the victim. His self-centered attitude was repelling. Please help me, I'm begging you. What about getting married again? Let's start over properly this time. I promise I'll never push you away again. Walter proposed desperately. I couldn't help but feel a mix of incredulity and annoyance. How could he think a simple plea for help could erase the years of neglect and misunderstanding? His desperation was evident, but so was the clarity of my decision not to fall back into the same pattern. I had moved on, and it was time for Walter to do the same. I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly at Walter's desperate suggestion. Are you kidding me? All of this is the result of your actions. I've been trying to find peace in my way for a long time. I kept hoping you would face reality, and now you want me to start over with you, pretending none of that ever happened? Do you expect me to go back to those miserable days? That's never going to happen. I refused to return to that life no matter what. Emotions overwhelmed me, and tears started to flow. I couldn't tell if they were from anger or sadness. Walter remained silent on the other end, having nothing to say in response to my words. Unable to continue the conversation any longer, I simply said goodbye and hung up. Walter didn't call back, and to avoid hearing his voice ever again, I blocked his number. Later, I heard from mutual friends that Walter and his family were evicted from their home. Walter had tried to persuade my former in-laws to cover his rent, but they were furious, refusing his request and further upsetting the landlord. With no other options, they were forced to leave. Walter hasn't had much luck finding a full-time job and is now working part-time to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my former in-laws had to sell their house and are now crammed into a rundown apartment, all three of them together. Meanwhile, I've been deeply focused on my work, and my boss has even discussed a promotion with me. There's a possibility I might become the first female manager in our company, and I've been receiving admiration from both colleagues and juniors. Sometimes friends inquire if I'm thinking about getting married again. Honestly, after my past experiences, I have a rather negative view of marriage. The idea of dating or marrying again doesn't appeal to me right now, but life is long and there's no rush. Many people in this generation live their entire lives happily unmarried. What matters most to me is living a life without regrets and staying true to myself. With that in mind, I want to continue navigating life at my own pace, embracing whatever comes my way with strength and independence. Hello, my name is Alexis, and I am 29 years old. I balance my professional life between working from home and the office. My husband Bruce, who is of the same age, shares a deep affection for his mother Doris. However, Doris often treats me unkindly. Despite the challenges we faced, Bruce and I recently celebrated our second wedding anniversary, and I take great pride in navigating our relationship's complexities. Work has become a sanctuary for me, providing a much-needed escape and satisfaction, leading to several promotions, an achievement not commonly seen among women in my field. Currently, I am on a business trip in Europe attending crucial meetings. During one such meeting, while my phone was on silent, it began to vibrate insistently. It was unusual, so I suspected an emergency, especially after noticing 5 missed calls from Doris. Concerned, I thought something might be amiss. I decided to step out and call her back. Just as I was about to do so, she called again. "Hello, Alexis, where are you?" she demanded, her tone laced with annoyance. I reluctantly answered, disliking her tone. "Hi, Doris, how are you? Is everything okay?" I queried. "Where are you?" she repeated, her impatience palpable. Although her demeanor was irritating, I was in the midst of an important discussion and preferred to avoid confrontation. "I'm sorry, Doris, didn't Bruce tell you? I'm in a meeting on a business trip. Can we talk later?" I responded gently. "Bruce mentioned it, but what are you doing leaving your house and husband alone? Come back home immediately," Doris demanded abruptly, as usual. Her demands were sudden and unreasonable. "I'm sorry, Doris, but I'm currently engaged in something crucial and cannot leave," I began to explain, but she interrupted. "You're so controlling even though you're just Bruce's wife. I don't care about your excuses. Come home right now." Her words were sharp, and though they stung, I had to maintain my composure for the sake of my professional responsibilities. Today was turning out to be unexpectedly pivotal. "Do you realize the significance of today?" I asked, clearly bewildered. Alla, smirking slightly, revealed, "We're celebrating my 62nd birthday today." Her tone carried a mix of triumph and expectation. This caught me off guard because I remembered her birthday was slated for later in the month. The revelation was even more surprising given that I was in the midst of a business trip. My husband and I had meticulously arranged a special dinner at an upscale restaurant to mark her milestone birthday later on. I was growing weary of Doris's continual attempts to control situations, which seemed to intensify each year, particularly when she knew I was engaged with critical work tasks. "As I've mentioned, I'm currently away on business, so I won't be able to make it back home," I explained calmly. "That's amusing," she retorted sarcastically. "I spoke to Bruce earlier, and he's taken the day off for me. All the relatives will be there. But you, Alexis, are always buried in work. You come off as so detached. How do you think that makes your husband's family feel?" Her words were designed to sting, and I knew if I engaged further, her sarcasm would only escalate. Since I was still amidst an important meeting, I had little choice but to cut the conversation short. "I'm sorry, but regardless of the situation, I can't attend your 62nd birthday celebration," I said. Doris's tone shifted drastically. She inhaled deeply, her frustration palpable. "Fine then, I won't consider you part of the family anymore. Don't bother coming back, it's like a divorce. Bruce deserves better," she declared, her words sharp and cutting. Her harsh remarks left me both angry and distressed. Yet I refused to escalate the argument over the phone. "All right, we'll discuss this when I get back. I'm sorry, but I need to go now," I responded. Doris snapped back. "What's with that attitude? I told you not to come back. I'll just talk to Bruce myself." And then she hung up. Drained from the interaction with my mother-in-law, I returned to my meeting, exhaling deeply. After 3 more days of back-to-back meetings, I finally headed home. The entire journey back, I was enveloped in anger and frustration due to the confrontation with Doris, barely recalling the drive itself. When I opened the front door and called out, I heard my husband's weary voice greeting me with a "welcome back." I slipped off my heels and made my way to the living room, leaving my luggage by the entrance. There, amidst a sea of cardboard boxes, was my husband Bruce, visibly perspiring as he sealed them with tape. "What's with all the boxes?" I inquired. My curiosity piqued. Bruce explained that the boxes were packed with my belongings. He recounted that during Doris's 62nd birthday celebration, which had taken place on the day she called me, she had announced to everyone that I had neglected her birthday and had been rude on the phone. She even told the relatives that she wanted me divorced and sent back to my parents' house because I was not a suitable match for her son. This was all too characteristic of my mother-in-law, so I pressed Bruce for more details. "And then what happened? Did your mother tell you to get a divorce and you just agreed to it?" "No, I didn't exactly agree," Bruce responded, his voice weary. but she insisted that I pack up your stuff. I felt cornered. What was I supposed to do? He paused his packing, looking defeated. What do you mean you didn't argue with your mother? Does this mean you're okay with the idea of us getting a divorce? I asked, my confusion and frustration mounting. Bruce then shared that his father, Russell, had also sided with Doris, telling him, if Doris is upset, it'll be hard on you. Best to just do what she says. So, Bruce had reluctantly gone along with the idea of a divorce. I was stunned by how easily Bruce seemed to accept his mother's dictate. What is wrong with your family? I pondered aloud. Your father is dominated by your mother, and you just blindly obey her too. It felt as if no one was standing by me. At a loss for words, Bruce finally said, what my mother decides is final. It's only until she calms down and things settle. This divorce isn't real. I'll come for you when things are better. His eyes pleaded with me for understanding. I wished he would direct that pleading towards his mother instead. How could a grown man like Bruce be so fearful of his mother? I thought to myself, feeling a mix of disappointment and disbelief. There seemed to be no salvaging this situation. I nearly felt ashamed, questioning what I had ever seen in him. As I processed the situation, I realized that perhaps this was an unexpected chance for liberation. Staying with Bruce meant continually facing Doris's antagonism and her constant insinuations about divorce. Parting ways might actually be a stroke of good fortune. I was perfectly capable of supporting myself, and living alone wouldn't mean deprivation of any sort. With this newfound clarity, I faced Bruce and said firmly, let's proceed with the divorce. Subsequently, I dialed Doris's number. After several attempts, she finally answered. Hello, Doris said. I responded softly, as you wish, we're getting a divorce. Doris's voice was unnaturally cheerful as she replied, yes, please leave. Finally, you realize you're not good enough for Bruce. I'm so relieved. Don't worry, I'll find him a new wife who is obedient, pretty, and nice to her in-laws. Her words were dripping with a misplaced sense of victory as she added, I'm sure Bruce will be just fine. I'll take care of him until he finds his next wife. You don't need to worry about that. After enduring her barrage of sarcasm, I told Doris, well, don't misunderstand, it's not just about you. Still buoyed by her mood, Doris retorted, oh, you're just a sore loser. Don't worry about me or Bruce, Alexis. She continued, I've got the divorce papers from the city office and gave them to Bruce. Don't forget to sign them. Then, without another word, she hung up. Bruce, who had overheard my conversation, looked oddly relieved. This prompted me to question his awareness of the situation. By the way, does your mother know you're actually a full-time house husband? How could I tell her that? He responded, his tone turning serious. My mother is obsessed with the idea that I'm a high-ranking employee at a big company. Right, I acknowledged. Reflecting on his behavior, I realized that Bruce had never been transparent with Doris. At home, he lounged in worn-out sweatshirts, but he switched to a suit whenever he had to meet her, pretending to be at work whenever she called. Elisa had proudly proclaimed at her birthday party that Bruce was such a devoted son, taking time off just to be there. She also boasted about his supposed status, claiming he could easily find a more obedient and attractive wife than me. This facade, maintained for the sake of appearances, was part of the bizarre dynamics that had steered our relationship toward this juncture. The revelation of the truth seemed inevitable once our divorce was finalized, but Doris, who held her son in such high esteem, would likely never anticipate that Bruce was no longer employed at the prestigious company he used to work for. In fact, Bruce had left his job about a year ago. What Doris perceived as her elite, high-status son was now an unemployed full-time house husband. Bruce's departure from his job stemmed from a significant mistake that resulted in a demotion, a pay cut, and a formal apology. He likely kept this hidden from his mother, fearing her reaction. The setback had a profound effect on him, especially given Doris's tendency to coddle him. The mere thought of returning to an office environment and facing the repercussions of his error triggered immense anxiety and nausea in him. Initially, he tried to manage the situation by reporting his absences and requesting paid leave, but eventually he stopped calling in altogether. As his unauthorized absences accumulated, he was terminated. Now, without any intention to seek new employment, Bruce relied heavily on my income. He hadn't shared any of this with Doris, knowing she would be both furious and disappointed. I felt a twinge of regret knowing I wouldn't witness Doris's reaction upon discovering her son's situation after my departure. I imagined she would be utterly shocked, perhaps to an extreme extent. However, that was no longer my issue to contemplate. When Bruce handed me the divorce papers, he mentioned they were just a facade to appease his mother. "Okay," I said, processing the information. I promptly filed the papers and signed a lease for a new apartment, moving out as soon as I could. A month later, to my surprise, Doris called. Despite thinking I had severed ties for good, curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "What do you want now? Aren't you happy to be rid of me?" I asked, my voice tinged with sarcasm. "You're still the same. Just listen to me," Doris replied, her tone unchanged as she spoke of Bruce. She revealed that since I had left, she had visited Bruce's apartment multiple times to help with chores, only to find him idly lounging in his room each time, with no indication of going to work or being ill. Suppressing a laugh, I responded nonchalantly, "Well, Bruce is like that because he has no intention of working again." Doris, seemingly oblivious to her role in the situation, shockingly asked, "Alexis, can you do something about it?" "Why should I? You didn't want me in your family and wanted nothing to do with me," I retorted. It was so typical of her to ask for help only when it suited her, after having mistreated me for so long. The irony of the situation was not lost on me, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication as I realized the full extent of her self-inflicted predicament. Doris then questioned me, seemingly trying to pin the blame on me. "I was wondering if you said something to Bruce before you left." It was astonishing how she was attempting to cast me as the villain, seemingly oblivious to the real issues with her son. "Really, Doris?" I replied, incredulous at her insinuation. "You think I married Bruce just for a luxurious life? Why would the divorce hurt if that were true?" She eyed me suspiciously as if I had married Bruce solely for his wealth. "Are you kidding me? I was the one supporting Bruce financially throughout our marriage. It was me providing for him. Because of Bruce, I couldn't even afford to live extravagantly," I continued. The thought crossed my mind. Should I consider asking for alimony? Doris was taken aback by my statement. "How dare you make up something like that, Alexis? You just forgot to ask for alimony, didn't you? Bruce has a higher income and position than you. Don't be so unreasonable. If you want money, Bruce can pay whatever you want. After all, he is a high-level employee at a major company," she retorted, her argument as preposterous as ever. Perhaps Bruce hadn't yet told her the truth. I didn't want to seem like I was merely gossiping, but I saw an opportunity to set the record straight. "Your proud son is a full-time house husband. He quit his job a long time ago," I revealed. "You're lying!" Doris shouted, her voice so loud I thought it might damage my eardrums. I pulled the phone away from my ear and suggested, "Why don't you check with his company? You'll find out who's telling the truth." Doris went silent for a moment, then, her tone noticeably softer, she stammered, "Well, what if that's true? How are we going to manage? I can't support my son on just my pension, and no one will want to marry him if he's unemployed. What are we going to do?" I couldn't help but grin at her sudden change of heart. "What shall we do?" I echoed her words, amusement in my voice. After a pause, she mumbled something to someone beside her. Then, with a completely altered tone, she pleaded, "Hey, Alexis, will you please come back home?" Her sudden shift puzzled me, but I replied firmly, "No, we're already divorced. I wouldn't come back to your family if heaven and earth turned upside down." The finality in my voice marked the end of that chapter as I moved on from the convoluted ties that had bound me. As I was speaking to Doris, a commotion erupted in the background. Someone was shouting. It sounded like Bruce. His voice cut through, "I told you I'd come for you when things settled down." Doris quickly responded, "Yes, you could remarry my son if you wanted." "What are you talking about?" I asked, baffled and firm. "No way, I wouldn't do it for the world. Don't joke about this." "Thanks, but seriously, no." I made it clear to Doris that I had no interest in rekindling anything with her son or entangling myself in any more toxic dynamics. I was done with someone who was overly devoted to his mother. "I did what you asked, so please stop changing your mind," Doris retorted. But the tension was palpable, even just through the phone. "There's a bit of verbal sparring here. It's not like you should take my words so seriously. You've been quite dismissive, haven't you?" she added. "I didn't think you'd go through with divorcing my son," she continued, her tone revealing her surprise at my firm rejection. In response to Doris's string of excuses, I replied, "Well, I was just tolerating the situation. Besides, Bruce packed up my things and essentially kicked me out without my consent." I vented my frustration, listing all that she had orchestrated against me. "You see, that was just a prank," she claimed nonchalantly. "A prank? It's worse than that," I said, utterly exasperated. There was nothing more to be said. Glancing at my watch, I noted it was nearly 2:00 p.m. My lunch break had been squandered on this fruitless conversation. "Ah, Doris, are you done now?" I asked, eager to wrap up. "What, Alexis? What did you say?" she replied, her voice sickeningly sweet. Did Doris think that a sweet tone would soften my response? Knowing I would not meet her expectations, I said firmly, "I'm going to hang up now. I have another meeting in a few minutes and need to review some documents." As I began to disconnect the call, Doris persisted. "Wait, Alexis. Hey, Alexis, say something." I could hear her shouting as I hung up, leaving the chaos and the unwelcome entreaties behind me. I was ready to move forward, free from the turmoil that had entangled me for too long. During the chaos of our phone call, Doris also took the opportunity to berate Bruce, chiding him for mishandling the situation and pointing out the consequences of his actions. It became evident that Doris was quick to blame everyone else for her troubles. Completely drained by her behavior, I ended the call and decided to block her number for good. Afterward, Bruce tried repeatedly to reach me. Seeing a clear path forward, I consulted my lawyer to seek alimony. Faced with the prospect of legal action, Bruce's family, likely anxious about the ramifications, agreed to settle the alimony in a lump sum payment. It seemed my former in-laws had to advance the money, which left Russell and Doris consistently agitated with Bruce. They urged him daily to find a job and work, which only added to his frustrations. Ultimately, Bruce moved back into his parents' house because he could no longer afford his apartment rent. He blamed his parents for his situation, which was now straining their finances, including their pension and retirement savings. Like mother, like sons, they continued to blame each other for their predicaments and refused to reflect on their contributions to the mess. They were even considering applying for welfare, a move I hoped would make them realize that their selfish behavior couldn't continue indefinitely. On a brighter note, for me, the business proposal I made during my trip was accepted, leading to a significant contract. This achievement resulted in another promotion, a higher salary, and a more affluent lifestyle. Now enjoying the freedom of a rich bachelor's existence, I was relieved to be free from the torment of in-laws and financial dependence on family members. Reflecting on the past, if I ever consider marriage again, I will undoubtedly conduct a thorough background check to avoid any mama's boys or troublesome in-laws. Hello, my name is Shirley, and I am a 31-year-old office worker. I married a man named Mason a year ago. We met through a blind date, and after a year and a half of dating, he proposed. I had always dreamt of settling down, so despite feeling it was a bit rushed, I accepted his proposal. However, looking back, I realize I should have approached things more cautiously. Shortly after our wedding, Mason abruptly decided to switch jobs. Surprised, I asked him why he made such a sudden change. He explained that his previous job hadn't allowed him to fully utilize his abilities. Even more shocking was the revelation that he had already resigned and would be leaving his job at the end of the month. Fortunately, he secured another job quickly, but it paid less than his previous one. Initially, I wasn't too concerned because I was also employed, but then Mason began urging me to quit my job. I might have considered it if his new income was sufficient for both of us. However, with his recent job change, his salary was lower, and he kept saying it would increase soon, without any confirmation of when. Quitting my job under such uncertain financial conditions seemed risky. We needed my income to continue saving and to manage our basic expenses like rent and car payments. It simply wasn't feasible to rely solely on Mason's current salary. One evening, Mason handed me divorce papers, seemingly to intimidate me. "You know I'm ready for this whenever," he challenged. In response, I urged him to calm down and reconsider what he had just said. Undeterred, Mason got up and retreated to his room. This confrontation left me reflecting on the quick decisions and the unexpected turn my life had taken since meeting Mason. I told Mason I wouldn't quit my job until his salary improved. He seemed to accept this at first, but the topic resurfaced repeatedly. Every time he brought it up, I gave him the same steadfast response. Now, a year into our marriage, his salary hadn't budged, and he continued to press the issue. "When are you going to quit?" he would ask. Sometimes I was tempted to snap back sarcastically, but I restrained myself, knowing our financial stability depended on my income. If quitting my job was so important to him, I felt he should focus on advancing his career to earn sufficiently. As time went on, I began to unravel why Mason was so persistent about me leaving my job. It became clear during our visits to his parents' house. Whenever we were with his mother, Martha, Mason would make a show of concern, telling her he wanted to ease her life. Martha would thank him, and then Mason would look at me significantly as if nudging me towards resignation. He suggested that his mother needed help, but Martha was far from helpless. She was healthy and active and even worked a part-time job that supported her hobbies and social life. She clearly didn't need me to look after her, yet Mason kept pushing. "If only one of us were home during the day, we could check on Mom daily," he once said out of the blue. It seemed he envisioned me visiting Martha every day, which sounded overwhelming and unnecessary. I questioned him directly, asking what he expected me to do since Martha was perfectly capable on her own. Mason listed mundane tasks like helping with housework or running errands. It was evident he had ideas about how I could contribute, but none of them seemed to necessitate abandoning my career. This constant cycle of requests and explanations was draining. I needed Mason to understand that while I was happy to support his family when necessary, sacrificing my job without a compelling reason was not a decision I could agree to lightly. "But Martha has her part-time job and spends most of her days out with friends, right?" I pointed out to Mason when he suggested I could handle the housework during the day. His response baffled me. Was he suggesting I become his mother's maid? It seemed Mason was very concerned about maintaining a certain image, particularly in front of his parents. If he was so eager to take care of them, why not handle the household chores himself? Despite his insistence, I remained firm in my decision not to quit my job. I also chose not to visit my in-laws on my days off, although I made an effort to see them during major holidays like New Year's. Reflecting on our visits, I noticed a pattern. Mason often delegated tasks to me. He'd ask me to tidy up, assist his mom, or run errands. I resisted these requests. When he suggested I go to the store, I'd retort, "Don't you know this area better than I do?" His reply was always that it wouldn't look right if he did it himself, a rationale I found puzzling and manipulative. It seemed like he was more interested in controlling the situation and projecting an image of familial care than genuinely caring for his parents or me. Over time, my view of Mason shifted. It appeared he was more invested in appearances than true affection or respect for me. When I finally confronted him, asking why he didn't pitch in or even quit his job to care for his mother, his reaction was telling. He looked disgusted and uncomfortable, saying, "That's not something I'm supposed to do. I'm giving you these instructions so my mom will think you are a considerate, useful wife. I hope you realize how kind I am to you." His words were revealing. Essentially, he wanted to offload all the demanding tasks onto me and showcase his virtue as if it were an extraordinary feat. But I am not his servant or slave, nor do I deserve to be treated with disrespect in front of my in-laws. It became increasingly clear that Mason's priorities were skewed, valuing appearances over genuine partnership and support. If Mason keeps up with his unreasonable demands, I won't stay quiet. I'll assert myself. Despite numerous discussions, Mason remains unchanged, constantly pestering me with the same old question, "Are you going to quit your job?" Additionally, every time we visit my in-laws, he continues to boss me around just as he always has. Reaching my limit, I decided it was crucial to have a serious conversation with him. "We need to talk about our future," I initiated, hoping to steer our conversation into something constructive. "What are you even trying to say?" Mason retorted, clearly annoyed. "I'm honestly fed up. I'm tired of you repeatedly asking me when I'll quit my job, and I'm exhausted from you pressuring me to take care of Martha." I laid out my grievances. "Why are you fed up with that? You're my wife, and it's your duty to care for your husband's parents," Mason countered. "Don't you think that's a huge responsibility to place solely on me? Shouldn't you, as their biological child, be responsible for helping with the housework and taking care of your parents in the first place?" I challenged his outdated views. "No way, it's the wife's duty to do it. Are you the kind of person who doesn't care about family?" Mason accused, visibly upset by my resistance. "I'm disappointed to hear you say that," he added. Seizing the opportunity to expose the double standard, I asked, "Then let me ask you this. How have you been taking care of my parents? If I asked you to care for my parents, would you do it then?" Mason looked at me blankly, unable to grasp the parallel. "What are you saying? Why should a husband take care of his wife's parents?" "So, does that mean you won't take care of my parents now or ever?" I pressed, trying to highlight his inconsistency. "The husband's parents and wife's parents are completely different," Mason replied, missing the point. "What difference does that make anyway? I don't get it," I said, feeling frustrated. "I didn't realize you were so clueless. It's like talking to my old boss," I continued, dismayed by his lack of understanding. "What are you saying?" Mason asked, confused. "I'm saying the husband's parents should come first, and you should take care of your wife's parents," I replied, trying to emphasize the importance of mutual support and equality in our responsibilities. I had to clarify what I was trying to say, so I exclaimed, "So you only prioritize your own family by blood? I'm so disappointed in you. I won't be visiting your parents anymore." "Why would you do that? Enough is enough." "I'm the one who wants you to stop this nonsense," I retorted. "No way, how dare you talk back like that? My mom is right." Mason shot back, his temper flaring. "Ha! Mom was talking about you. She said you're a badly behaved wife. That's why she gave me this," Mason said, pulling a piece of paper from his bag. It was divorce papers. "What? You already had divorce papers ready?" I was shocked, but Mason seemed strangely proud. "See, I scared you, didn't I? I'm prepared for this anytime, so think about what you just said," Mason declared smugly before leaving for his room. Unbelievable. Why is Mason so selfish? That look of triumph on his face, it's clear the divorce papers are just a threat to make me obey him. The fact that Martha was involved made me even more suspicious. Mason is acting like a puppet for his mom, trying to control me while following her orders. It's ridiculous. I won't let Mason have his way. How can he not see that our marriage is in trouble when he acts like this? His lack of understanding just annoys me more. Mason had already completed the divorce papers and handed them to me with witnesses including Martha and his friends. This meant I could sign and file them whenever I chose. The next day, after Mason went to work, I filled out the divorce papers and submitted them to the city office. As a precaution, I also filed a notice of non-acceptance of the marriage certificate. I called my parents and explained the situation, knowing Mason might threaten to file a marriage certificate on his own. When my parents learned that I had prepared the divorce papers, they were initially shocked but fully supported my decision, outraged by Mason's behavior. They immediately offered to help me move my belongings. Taking a leave from work, I had my parents come over and we relocated all my things to their house while Mason was away. I decided to stay with my parents for a while. It was the first time in a long time that I felt truly comfortable and at ease in their home. Reflecting on my marriage, it became clear that Mason never contributed his fair share to our household chores. I was the one cooking dinner after long work days and handling all the cleaning and laundry on my days off. On top of this, he expected me to also care for his parents, which was just not feasible. That evening, Mason called me, probably just back from work. "Hello? Hey, where are you right now?" he asked. "I'm at my parents' house," I replied. "Oh, why would you go back there without my permission? And where's all your stuff? Don't tell me you're staying the night," he questioned, his tone revealing his surprise and selfishness. I almost laughed at how oblivious he was to the seriousness of the situation, thinking I was merely staying overnight when I had taken most of my belongings with me. "I'm not coming back," I said firmly. "What are you talking about? Come back here and make me some food," he demanded. "Make it yourself," I replied, ending the call. I couldn't entertain a conversation about divorce with him if he continued to behave so dismissively. I decided to wait for him to come to my parents' house and blocked his number to give myself some peace. A week later, Mason showed up at my parents' home, accompanied by his parents. They all wore serious expressions as we met in the living room, 3 against 3. "How could you do this? How could you leave without my permission?" Mason demanded, his voice filled with incredulity and accusation. "You were treating me like a housekeeper, Mason. All I ever asked was that you take care of your family responsibilities," I responded, standing my ground. I countered, "That's not true. What kind of wife am I if I don't take care of Mason?" Martha gave me a fierce glare. My father began to tremble with anger, but I quickly stepped in. Mason told me to quit my job and take care of Martha, claiming it was my duty as his wife. Yet when it comes to my own family, he expects me to handle everything alone. Ultimately, Mason wants obedience and uses me to care for his parents while taking credit for it. That's why he prioritizes his parents over mine. "Have you heard Mason say these things?" Martha continued to glare, but Liam looked confused, indicating he hadn't been aware of this before. "Let me clear the air," Mason said suddenly, bringing up the divorce papers and claiming it was all Martha's idea. "Why would you suggest that?" Liam asked, clearly surprised. "Oh no, it's because Camilla has an attitude problem," Martha stammered. "And did you say that Camilla's parents aren't a priority?" I pressed. "Well, it's only natural that your parents come first," Martha retorted defensively. "Don't be absurd. I came here to support you after hearing about the unfair treatment Camilla endured. But now it seems you're the one at fault. Don't hide behind her parents' authority to get your way," Liam said, making Mason visibly shrink in his seat. Liam then apologized to me and my parents. "I'm truly sorry for the trouble caused by my foolish son. I will have a serious talk with him." "Liam, you're not to blame at all, so please don't apologize," I replied. "Thank you for your kind words, but there's something else I need to say." I turned to Mason, who was now nervous. "The divorce papers you gave me, I've already filed them. We're no longer married." Mason and Martha both turned pale. "Why did you file them without my permission?" Mason demanded, shocked. "You told me I could file them whenever I wanted. Besides, you had already filled out your part and had Martha sign as a witness." I calmly explained the situation, but Mason was clearly at a loss for words. Seeing the tension, Liam, furious, intervened. "Mason, you used divorce as a threat," he exclaimed, and unable to contain his anger, slapped Mason across the face. Martha, witnessing this, was visibly shaken. Liam turned to me and apologized sincerely. "I apologize deeply that you had to witness this. You have every right to divorce this fool. On behalf of Mason, I'm truly sorry for the ruin brought upon your marriage," he said, his grip tightening on Mason's collar as he demanded apologies from both Mason and Martha before ushering them out of the house. Later, I thanked Liam for his intervention. He assured me that all of Mason's assets and property were transferred to me without any hassle. Given my higher income and the effort I had put into managing our household, it was a relief to secure everything from our marriage. I later found out that Liam had divorced Martha, clearly disgusted by her actions. One day I ran into a colleague from Mason's old workplace who shared some surprising news. Mason had not been performing well at his job and often received harsh criticism from his boss. In defiance, Mason resigned and switched jobs, which only added to my frustration with him. Rather than taking responsibility for his shortcomings, he blamed others, which likely contributed to his lower pay at the new job. Now, I'm relieved to have left him. I've rented a cozy apartment and am enjoying living independently. Work is going smoothly, and I even received a recent raise. Currently, I'm not interested in relationships and prefer to focus on my career. Mason always cared more about appearances than actual abilities. He maintained a facade at home but failed to improve professionally. Sadly, many spouses use divorce threats as leverage, thinking they're powerful, but it's a big mistake. I hope they realize their folly and find happiness alone. Meanwhile, I'm grateful to have moved on from Mason and look forward to meeting someone special in the future, when I'm ready. Hello, I'm Helen, and I recently celebrated my 30th birthday. Years ago, I decided to marry a man who had quite a few issues, naively believing that my love could resolve all of them. I thought I could show him his worth, but unfortunately, love has its limits and cannot compel someone to love themselves. I'll refer to my ex-husband as Scott. He had an intense obsession with pleasing his parents, a drive that went beyond the usual desire to make them proud. His entire life was overshadowed by this compulsive need for their approval. Scott's parents, whom I'll call Mr. and Mrs. Kyle, seemed indifferent to his life, which only made him more desperate for their attention. It was painful to see, and it didn't take long for me to realize that I couldn't fill the emotional void they left in him. To complicate matters, Scott frequently used our savings to buy expensive gifts and vacations for his parents, draining our finances on items they hardly appreciated. This reckless spending became a perennial source of conflict between us, and it often felt like I was vying with his parents for his focus, which took a heavy toll on our relationship. Despite the myriad issues and the endless disagreements, I still had feelings for Scott. I held on to the hope that he might break away from the unrealistic expectations set by his parents and find true contentment within himself. It became painfully clear that my love alone wasn't enough to shield Scott from the negative influences of his parents. Things escalated one day when Scott approached me with a serious look, signaling that he had something significant to discuss. Given the roller coaster of our relationship, I braced myself for something drastic, sensing this conversation might spark our most intense disagreement yet. "Helen, there's something important I need to talk about," he began with a grave tone. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart sinking in anticipation of bad news. "It's about my parents. They're retiring soon, and I want to surprise them with a luxury vacation. It's going to be quite expensive," he revealed, his face a mix of excitement and anxiety. "That sounds nice, as long as the money comes from your personal savings. I really don't want to dip into our joint savings again," I responded, hoping to steer clear of another financial argument. "I don't have enough to cover it on my own. I was hoping we could use some of our savings," Scott admitted, his expression torn between hope and concern. "Scott, if it's more than we can afford, maybe we should reconsider this expense," I suggested gently, trying to anchor him back to reality. However, my words only upset him. "You just don't understand, Helen. I love my parents and want to do something special for them." "Love isn't about counting every penny, it's about grand gestures," he argued with passion. I countered, "But love is also about being there for each other and making sacrifices together, not at the expense of our financial stability. This trip might be important to them, but we need to think about our future too." Scott remained adamant. "I have to do this for them. I thought you, of all people, would understand. They're everything to me," he implored. "And you're everything to me, Scott, but we have to be practical. We can't just use all our savings on one trip," I reasoned, searching for a middle ground. Instead, he accused me of being selfish and not seeing the importance of his gesture. "It's not about being selfish, it's about being sensible and planning for our future," I explained, my anxiety growing as he mentioned he needed all of our savings. "All of our savings, Scott? That's just reckless," I exclaimed, stunned by his request. "You're being heartless," he shot back, convinced I couldn't grasp his desire to make his parents happy. "No, Scott, I'm being realistic," I replied, feeling the chasm between us widen with each word. "We can't afford to spend $35,000 on a whim," I stated, my patience wearing thin. His nonchalant assumption that we could simply get the money back later only deepened my irritation. "Really, Scott? That's not how this works," I replied, my disbelief palpable. We were deadlocked, and our perspectives on love, responsibility, and finances were poles apart. The argument escalated, voices raised, and in the heated moment, items were hurled and shattered, our frustration manifesting physically. Amidst the turmoil, Scott dropped a bombshell declaring that if I couldn't support him, he wanted a divorce. He likely expected me to react with panic, desperate to salvage our marriage. Instead, I summoned all my calm and resolve and simply said, "Okay, Scott, if that's truly what you want." The shock was evident on his face. He had anticipated tears and pleas, but instead, he met my unwavering stance. I was done catering to his fantasies. If he chose to squander his future on unattainable dreams, he would do so alone. I held nothing back, expressing my thoughts clearly. His ceaseless pursuit of his parents' approval was futile, like trying to stay dry in a storm with just an umbrella. He attempted to counter, but I silenced him with a simple raise of my hand, declaring my refusal to continue fighting for a love hindered by unrealistic expectations and an incessant need for validation. "Go ahead, spend all your money trying to win over people who barely notice you," I told him, resolute in my decision to end the cycle of disappointments and broken promises. With that, the stark reality struck him. Our marriage had morphed into a battlefield, and it was time to surrender and seek peace separately. A month has passed since our divorce was finalized, and I must say, the sense of liberation is profound. Gone are the exhausting arguments over finances and the futile quest for approval that was never ours to claim. Now I breathe easier, freed from the oppressive weight of his insecurities that once clouded my days. Each new day now shines a bit brighter. True, Scott has attempted to re-enter my life, feigning concern and inquiring about my well-being, but I see through his charade. I'm not about to be deceived again. As the old saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I resolutely turned away from Scott's attempts to rekindle our past relationship. I had come to understand that I invested too much in trying to mend someone who had no desire to change. It was now time to prioritize my personal growth and happiness. Rebuilding my life wasn't easy, to say the least. Splitting our shared assets and adapting to a new financial reality required patience and resilience. Although I was accustomed to a certain lifestyle, I was no stranger to adaptation and welcomed the challenge to reshape my life. As I embarked on this journey of self-discovery, I uncovered a strength and independence I never knew I possessed. Reconnecting with old friends, resuming hobbies I had put aside, and exploring new interests opened up a world brimming with possibilities. I was determined to seize this fresh start. Yes, there were moments filled with self-doubt and loneliness, and adjusting to a tighter budget was tough. The scars from a failed marriage don't vanish overnight, but with each day, I found solace in knowing that I was no longer compromising my happiness to cater to someone else's insecurities. The relative ease with which I moved forward was perhaps indicative of how long I had clung to a relationship that was doomed. It was astonishing to see how much I could achieve once I was liberated from that emotional burden. A month into this new chapter, I was still adjusting, but feeling more empowered than ever. Amidst this transformation, Scott's messages took on a new tone. He claimed he was in danger and urgently needed to meet. Weary of his relentless attempts to reach out, I decided it was time to address the situation head-on. Amid his ongoing pleas, I called him. "Scott, we've been over this. We're divorced. It's time for us to move on," I said with firmness. "Helen, please, I just need a moment to explain. I'm in serious trouble, and you're the only one I can turn to for help," he implored, his voice perhaps carrying a genuine tone of fear. Or maybe it was just the absence of hearing his voice that made it seem so. Whether it was the long silence since our last heartfelt conversation, or his seemingly sincere distress, a part of me was intrigued yet cautious about his intentions. Despite my reservations, I agreed to meet Scott. "Fine, but we're not meeting at my place. Let's go to that cafe we used to frequent. No tricks, understood?" I stipulated. "Thank you, Helen. I promise I just need someone to listen. You're the only one who understands me," he replied, sounding genuinely relieved. You might be wondering why I would agree to meet Scott after everything that happened. Truthfully, I questioned my own decision. Yet sometimes curiosity and a lingering concern, no matter how faint, compel us to act against our better judgment. I couldn't completely dismiss his plea. Divorced or not, I couldn't deny that part of me still cared. So there we were, sitting across from each other in the cozy cafe, enveloped in the comforting aroma of coffee. However, not even the familiar, soothing environment could ease the tension. Watching Scott, with anxiety etched across his face and those deliberately sad eyes trying to tug at my heartstrings, was almost comical. This time, though, I remained unmoved. I leaned back, composed and in control, prepared to listen but determined to keep the conversation on my terms. "Okay, Scott, you have my attention for now. What's this danger you're supposedly in? Just so you know, I'm not here to save you. I'm done cleaning up your messes," I stated, my tone firm yet open to hearing him out. Scott sighed deeply, his face a blend of regret and desperation that was almost pitiable, but I steeled myself against any emotional manipulation. "I know I've made mistakes before, Helen, but this situation is different. I've gotten involved with some seriously bad people. I owe them a lot of money, and they're not known for their patience," he confessed. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical of his melodramatic tale. "Really, Scott? Dangerous people? Are we revisiting the tale of your imaginary friends who seem to attract trouble?" I couldn't hide my disbelief. Scott's expression shifted to one of hurt and frustration, evidently hoping for a more sympathetic response. "No, Helen, this isn't made up. I'm in deep trouble and coming to you as my last resort," he insisted, his voice tinged with desperation. "Let me guess, you spiraled after our divorce," I continued, piecing together the predictable pattern of his post-separation choices. As Scott shared his predicament, my voice unintentionally rose, attracting the attention of other cafe patrons. I shot them an apologetic look, trying to regain my composure. "Look, I got caught up in something foolish, I admit, but now I'm in a mess that's bigger than I can handle alone," Scott confessed, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. My frustration was close to boiling over. How could he just waltz back into my life with yet another crisis? Yet, beneath my irritation, a faint shadow of empathy lingered. "How much are you in for?" I asked, bracing myself for the answer. $120,000, Scott responded sheepishly. $120,000, Scott? Are you out of your mind? My outburst was louder this time, drawing sharp glances from around the cafe. I didn't bother with an apology. Anyone overhearing our conversation would likely understand my reaction. Helen, please, I'm begging you. I've got nowhere else to turn. I know I've made a mess of things, but you're the one person who really believed in me, Scott pleaded, his eyes glistening with a sincerity that momentarily reminded me of the man I once loved. But those days were long gone, and my priority now was self-preservation, even if it meant walking away from him. Don't pull at my heartstrings, Scott. It's way too late for that. When you said you needed help, I thought you meant maybe $20,000, not $120,000. You've completely lost it, I responded, my voice a mix of disbelief and indignation. Overwhelmed, Scott began to cry, seemingly oblivious to the uncomfortable glances from other patrons. Scott, calm down. This isn't the place for a scene, I said firmly. What's going to happen if you don't pay this back? They're threatening to harm me, Helen. I'm not joking. This is really bad, he managed between sobs. His words hung heavy in the air, leaving me torn between my lingering concern for his well-being and the need to protect myself from being dragged back into his chaos. Seeing the seriousness of his situation, I was forced to consider the gravity of the risk he faced. I softened my approach. All right, Scott, start from the beginning and tell me everything, I urged gently. He then recounted his attempts to fund an extravagant trip for his parents. He had borrowed money, trusting a friend who ultimately let him down, plunging him deep into debt. As he narrated his missteps, I felt a mix of frustration at his reckless decisions and a reluctant amusement at the outcome. So, you borrowed money from risky people to impress your parents, who hadn't even noticed your efforts? Is that what happened? I asked, seeking clarity on the sequence of events. Scott's expression fell and tears streamed down his face as he faced the painful truth. Yes, ever since they went on that trip, it's like I don't matter to them, he confessed, his voice laden with regret. Even though I was irritated, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for him. It was a harsh lesson for Scott, and seeing him so remorseful stirred a compassionate response within me. You've really gotten yourself into a tough spot, I remarked. Scott, I know you don't want to hear "I told you so," but you did create this mess yourself. I warned you it wasn't a good idea, and now, after choosing to leave me over it, here you are, struggling. You invested everything in trying to make your parents happy, but all you received in return was their indifference. It's a hard lesson, but it's one you needed to learn, I explained, feeling a mix of concern and resignation. This was a bitter truth for both of us. Scott had pegged his self-worth on people who couldn't appreciate his sacrifices, and I had to come to terms with the fact that I couldn't shield him from his own decisions. I hoped that confronting these tough consequences would help him realize that I had always been on his side, but his relentless quest for parental approval was his undoing. As we sat in silence, the weight of our shared past, filled with broken promises and unrealized dreams, was palpable. I realized it was time to completely let go. No more second chances, no more attempts to mend what was beyond repair. Scott needed to confront the outcomes of his actions on his own, and I needed to move forward and find my path to happiness. I hope you find a way out of this, Scott, I said, my voice carrying a firm tone of finality. You're not going to help? Scott asked, looking genuinely surprised. No, I'm not, I replied. Why not? He pressed. Because I don't have the money to bail you out. And even if I did, taking on a huge loan that I'd be paying off for years isn't something I can afford. I can't afford to be as reckless as you've been, I explained, my tone steady and unwavering. Come on, Helen, please, I'm begging you, he pleaded, his desperation palpable. Scott, expecting me to fix this for you, especially given how you're acting, isn't realistic, I said, feeling my patience thinning. Yeah, I did expect that. You're my ex-wife, not my enemy, he replied, still clinging to a shred of hope. But it was clear our lives had taken different paths. My focus now was on securing my peace and happiness, separate from the chaos that once intertwined our lives. And that's the problem, Scott. You expect me to always be there to clean up your mess because that's what I used to do. I was your wife, so helping you out of trouble was something I did naturally. But I can't and shouldn't keep doing that. It's not my responsibility anymore, I continued. After everything, I don't owe you anything, especially considering how our money was wasted on your ungrateful and toxic parents, I added. But I love them, Scott said, his voice softening. And I love myself too. Loving myself means doing what's best for me, including taking care of my well-being, I countered. Scott looked down, realizing that he wasn't going to get the help he wanted from me. Understanding his bleak situation, I offered one last piece of advice. Since it seems like you're out of options, here's one piece of advice: leave. Move somewhere far away where they can't find you. I'm unsure what more you're asking of me, Scott, I said, my tone steady yet resolute as I faced him. He sat in silence, visibly upset by my decision to decline his request for help this time. It's time for us to separate paths, Scott. I can no longer allow myself to be ensnared in your troubles, I explained, hoping he would grasp the gravity of my words. We each need to pursue our tranquility. His reply came with a hint of bitterness. You would help if you really cared, he argued, his voice laced with anger. I'm saying farewell, Scott. I'm also changing my phone number, I announced determinedly as I got to my feet. Walking away, I left him there, sitting alone, his face a complex blend of emotions. It was a hard yet crucial choice I had to make for my happiness and dignity.